More for you at the top of the hour here on France 24. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. Lots of football fans in this country discovering on the map where Qatar is, thanks to their purchase of David Beckham. The announcement formalized this week. Paris, which has broken the bank on another signing earlier in the season of Javier Pastore, a record transfer. And we've been talking about how Qatar monies that influence, and we're discussing what is the agenda, if you will, of the Qataris with Arnaud de Pierrefeu, who advises, French attorney who advises businesses both here and there. He joins us from Doha. From Oxford, journalist Hugh Miles, whose books include Al Jazeera, the inside story of the Arab news channel that is challenging the West. From Cairo, Borzu Daragahi of the Financial Times. And here in the studio, Ardavan Amir Aslani, who advises Persian Gulf states, but not Qatar's, as you can hear if you were listened to part one of our discussion. We were mentioning how the star power of the Qataris, and it's not just after the purchase of a Paris football club. In 2007, the Emir, a guest of honor, the Bastille Day Parade, where his son marched. In 2008 alone, the French president twice visiting Doha. And in 2009, the Emir returned the favor with a state visit.
For us, it's a great pleasure and an honor to welcome you and your wife here. You embody the extraordinary history of the state of Qatar. Your ancestors came from the heart of the Arabic Peninsula and transformed the territory and gave it its identity. You have come a long way since those historic times.
Arnaud de Pierrefeu, how do you explain that close relationship between France's current president and the Emir?
Well, I think France and Qatar have had a very close relationship since the creation of the state of Qatar 40 years ago. I think that Mr. Chirac was also coming to Qatar quite often. Well, I believe that France probably needs Qatar to try to have some influence on the regional politics, and Qatar probably needs France for a number of reasons. So the two countries have found good reasons to try to work together on a number of issues, and being here in Doha, I can tell you that, yes, it's true. France is having a very strong position here in terms of, I would say, political influence, economy, culture, sport. I was in China before being in Qatar, and I must say in China, the position of France was probably in the second or third division compared to other countries. Here, really, we would be, I would say, in the first league, probably with the US and the UK and Germany as the strongest partners of Qatar.
In 2007, the French president's spouse at the time, Cecilia Sarkozy, went to Libya for the freeing of 5 Bulgarian nurses and 1 Palestinian doctor. After the deal, there were profuse thanks given to the Qataris, who acted as emissaries. Ardavan Amir Aslani, was that a watershed moment in the bilateral ties between Paris and Doha?
It was an important moment for the current administration of France. Without Qatari money paid out, as a matter of fact, to the Libyan government at the time, asking for damages, the poor Bulgarian nurses would have never been freed.
That's what the Libyans have said since.
The Libyans have said that since, and even at that time there was no secret, because at that time the Libyans were asking for around 500 million euros, if my souvenir is correct, of damages to be paid to them. Somebody had to pay that amount. Nobody was willing to do that. Qatar came up. It was a high-profile marketing moment. We should also remember one thing. France's specific proximity to Qatar has also its own problems. As I told you, Qatar has its own issues with other Arab countries in the region. Saudi Arabia, for example, is not very happy in relation to the way and path that Qatar is following. Maybe that has its own word in saying why France didn't manage to win the fast-track line from Mecca to Medina in Saudi Arabia, or that we've been not very performing well in relation to selling arms to Saudi Arabia. Kuwait is just about as rich as Qatar is. So is Abu Dhabi. There are lots of other rich sheikdoms in the area. We only have one who makes such fuss about it. And the argument of being next to Saudi Arabia as a threat is not one that will buy through. And
but
being
the French have opened an airbase in Bahrain, so it's not
no,
just...
not in Bahrain. The French have an airbase in Abu Dhabi.
In Abu Dhabi.
That is correct. That is correct. But the Americans have the largest Air Force base that they do in the Middle East and in Qatar. It's also a fact.
What is interesting, Borzo Daragahi, when you look at those relations, what sense do you get as to why Qatar, which we've been talking about soft power a lot, suddenly bore its teeth when it came to Libya, diving headfirst, providing weapons, fighter jets, all this to being the Arab leader, if you will, in pushing for the ouster of Muammar Gaddafi?
Well, I think that when these Arab revolutions started this year, many nations were simply dumbfounded about how to respond to them. And I think Qatar, along with Turkey, interestingly, both saw very early on that they could not sit on the fence, so to speak, and that they had to come out on the right side of history and to come out on the winning side of these revolutions. And so they began very aggressively sort of placing their bets on like-minded allies in these countries. And as you see in Libya, where the Qataris were quite aggressive in backing the rebels who were sort of this kind of version of moderate Islam, very much influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood. They have done basically the same thing in Tunisia and Egypt as well, sort of placing their bets on like-minded ideological allies who will promote a sort of moderate, what they describe as a moderate version of political Islam without really challenging the sort of pro-business capitalistic policies of these countries.
Hugh Miles, when you see that many are accusing the Qataris of being active in the internal affairs of Libya post Muammar Gaddafi, with an influence, for instance, in the declaration of Sharia law there. What do you think? Is there substance to that?
I think there's definitely a danger of overstretch. The fact is that Qatar is a tiny country and it has been getting involved in Libyan internal affairs and playing around with Islamic groups and helping promote some Islamists from Libya through giving them airtime on Al Jazeera. And this is really a big departure for anything Qatar has ever done before. I mean, what we've seen in the last year is Qatar, the phenomenon of Qatar stepping out onto the world stage really for the first time in a very, very big way and filling the vacuum in the Arab world left by the lack of leadership, because Egypt and Saudi Arabia are both so crippled by internal problems and aging leaderships. And so Qatar has been very dynamic. But the more Qatar develops their foreign ambitions, the more chance there is that they're going to run into problems. So they are playing a dangerous game.
All right, and by the way, people say it's Qatar that had a hand in naming Mustafa Jibril, the prime minister, now the former prime minister of Libya, and that was enough to enrage the ambassador to the United Nations from Tripoli, the former foreign minister Abdel Rahman Shalgam, who spoke to France 24 Sylvain Attal last month.
Regarding the situation with Qatar, we are grateful for them. They did a lot for us, politically, militarily, financially, but we ask them don't to intervene in our internal affairs, to keep the same distance with all the Libyan groups and factions.
So, turning to the present today, Borzo Daragahi, how much influence does Qatar wield in Libya?
Well, I think through Al Jazeera television, it has a lot of influence still throughout the Arab world. It has a lot of soft power. I mean, until Libya gets its act together, economically, it would not be very expensive to bankroll a political party. I think the same goes for Egypt. So if someone wanted to, and none of this stuff is transparent, if someone wanted to, they could very easily buy an ally in one of these countries undergoing these dramatic transitions. Whether Qatar is doing this or not is not clear, but I would bet that they probably are, just because they want to have some influence in these countries as they emerge from this very chaotic period.
Ardavan Amir Aslani.
Here in the declaration of the Libyan ambassador to the UN, you have the entire position of a large number of Arab countries summarized. They're saying, thank you, but mind your own business. I mean, the open-fledged support that Qatar has brought in favor of the Sanusi Brotherhood, which is basically those that are in power today, supposedly to defend this moderate version of the Muslim Brotherhood, if anything like this exists, has created problems. And even talking about Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera has a tendency to hit upon Syria, to hit upon Libya. But has anyone heard Al Jazeera say anything about the civil strife in Bahrain, where the Sunni minority is crushing the Shiite revolution ongoing over there? Or has anyone heard anything mentioned by Al Jazeera about the internal situation of Qatar itself? So you've got one attitude looking differently and dealing differently with different issues around the globe. This reaction that the Arab world, summarized by the words of Mr. Shalgham, and here you have only a portion out of the entire interview, well, is a translation of the fed-upness that a number of countries are more and more expressing in relation to this undue power that they attribute to this country of 225,000 citizens. Any street in Paris has more inhabitants.
But fair play to them. In that respect.
No, the problem is that they're alienating at the same time a lot of people. You know, it was mentioned this evening that the Emir of Qatar looks down upon the UAE. I want to see how that happens, but this is not an illustration of trying to establish friendly relations with people around you. I have never heard anybody from the UAE humiliate or criticize people in Qatar, nor deal any side deals with the Iranians or the Saudis. Have I?
We were mentioning Al Jazeera. One of the stars of Al Jazeera in Arabic is an Egyptian cleric, Hugh Miles. Tell us a little bit about Yusuf al-Qaradawi.
Well, Yusuf al-Qaradawi is an extremely influential figure. He hosts one of Al Jazeera's most popular shows called Sharia wal Hayat, which means religion and life. And it's hard for any secular Westerner, I think, to understand just how somebody like this could be so influential. But from his pulpit on Al Jazeera, he makes pronouncements about all kinds of issues, ranging from politics to social life to economics, telling people how they should behave in an Islamic way. And millions of people from Morocco to Indonesia listen to what he says very carefully and will follow his directions. So he's an extraordinarily one of the most influential figures in Islam. And he sits very much in opposition to the Saudi clerics, because the Saudis have traditionally thought of themselves as those in charge of Sunni Islam. So Sheikh al-Qaradawi is an alternative voice, if you like.
And do you sense that his discourse has perhaps changed since the advent of the Arab Spring, Hugh Miles?
Well, it's very hard to measure, given that he appears on television frequently. But I think that what he does is he bolsters Qatari foreign policy. He gives Islamic license, if you like, to what the Qataris do, and this is very useful for the Qataris because it promotes them in the eyes of Muslims everywhere.
Borzo Daragahi. I, like most Westerners, do not speak Arabic. I only see the English language version of Al Jazeera. How do Egyptians feel where you are about Al Jazeera?
Well, I think that they're mixed, as in most Arab countries. You know, it's interesting. Al Jazeera Arabic has many different faces. Sometimes it's just a straight news channel. Sometimes it has very, very provocative talk shows. Sometimes it has, these clerics like Yusuf Qaradawi, who at one point openly called for Muammar Gaddafi and Bashar al-Assad and Hosni Mubarak to step down, taking very political positions. And sometimes what it does, it will just show, for example, YouTube footage of a country like Egypt or Syria, and it will have people calling in, activists calling in, screaming, yelling, and creating this very, very excitable sense that is very hard to distinguish from out-and-out propaganda. And those who understand this are a little turned off by this and a little alienated by it, and they switch to other channels that they view as a little bit more objective and balanced. But to many people, it's mesmerizing, and it has a very powerful emotional effect.
All right, and before we go, Arnaud de Pierrefeu, I just want to go back to a statement that Hugh Miles mentioned earlier about the Qataris perhaps overstretching themselves. Business-wise, and from what you see, do you see that people sense that danger and there's maybe a consolidation period to come, or the sky's the limit?
Well, I think Qatar is making a lot of investments abroad, but they are, of course, making a lot of investment at home. And I think it's, of course, very much needed in view of all the infrastructure they need to build for the events that they have won, including, of course, the World Cup. I think that, yes, there is a sense here locally that now Qatar needs to focus on what they've done. They've done, I would say, a great job in landing an event such as the World Cup. They managed to, I would say, appear as a kind of example for the Arab world. I heard what other people said about resentment in some Arab countries about Qatar, but at some point last year when Qatar won the World Cup, they could be seen as a kind of example. They showed that an Arab country could host a modern event. So now they have to focus on making all the necessary investment and probably not overstretching
to make it come to life. We're gonna have to leave it there, and we're of course looking forward to seeing air-conditioned stadiums. That's something we'll be watching. Arnaud de Pierrefeu, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Hugh Miles for joining us from Oxford, Borzu Daragahi from Cairo, and Ardavan Amir Aslani here in our studios in Paris. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's Business, and that's hosted by Marcus Carlson.